On July 1st, 1946, the U.S. Navy tests one of two atom bombs in Operation Crossroads at the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific Ocean. The tests are meant to gauge what the effect of nuclear arms on warships are. To the world, it is an inspiration of a brave new age of technological wonder. Despite the widely publicized reports of suffering from the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki a year earlier, the horrors of death by radiation poisoning and contamination are yet to enter into public understanding. Instead, the spectacular explosions in a tropical lagoon will inspire the world. The juxtaposition between destruction and the imagery of scantily clad islanders inspires French fashion designer Louis Réard to name his, for the time shockingly exposing line of two-piece swimsuits, bikinis, quipping that, like the bomb, the bikini is small and devastating. It is in this environment of naive celebration of apocalyptic power that the world truly enters the atomic age. This is how we got there. I'm Spartacus Olsson. Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost's Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we follow the wars that wouldn't end within a Cold World War, the beginning of the digital age, the atomic age, and the space age, when we began to replicate our minds electronically, gained the power to end our very existence as a species, and discovered that we can truly reach for the stars. From humble beginnings, our species has grown and developed, shaped by our most desperate situations. World War II, our darkest moment, has shaped us in ways that we are only beginning to understand, culturally, politically, and technologically. These technological advances have changed the rules of the game, and we stride into a new world, where armies will no longer be the strongest manifestation of a state's power, where the prospect of Armageddon will come to be accepted as a fact of life, where the building blocks of existence itself, atoms, have been subordinated to the political whims of leaders. Welcome to the atomic age. Now, the potential power and significance of the atom has been understood for some time now, but the pace only quickens with developments during the Second World War. The concept of an underlying invisible form of matter which binds the universe together has been suggested, at least in theoretical terms, since the age of classical philosophy in ancient Greece. This suspicion of a system or network of invisible building blocks grows and expands with the advent of modern Western philosophy and science. From the 17th century onwards, theories abound concerning the precise shape and nature of this system. Isaac Newton imagined something like a miniature billiard ball to serve the purpose of his mechanical universe of masses in motion. It seems probable to me, he wrote in 1704, that God in the beginning formed matter in solid, massy, hard, impenetrable, movable particles, of such sizes and figures, and with such properties, and in such proportion to space, as most conduced to the end to which he formed them. Despite such theories, the actual existence of the atom itself remains unproven until the dawn of the 20th century. But how do we get from simply understanding the atom to harnessing it? Well, in the early decades of the 1900s, many different physicists like Ernest Rutherford, John Cockcroft, Enrico Fermi, and Ernest Walton contribute to further understanding these, the building blocks that make up the universe. The breakthrough that will lead to a bomb harnessing the very energy of creation is made in 1938 at the German Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Chemistry, when a team led by physicists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann successfully demonstrate the process of nuclear fission by bombarding a nucleus with neutrons. The understanding in the scientific world that this energy can be used as a weapon is immediate and soon leads to whispers of what will become a defining concept of the atomic age: mutually assured destruction. Such a weapon could assure victory in war or reverse an impending defeat. It might also paradoxically protect against attack. It must be realized, two physicists working in Britain advised the British government secretly in 1940 that no shelters are available that would be effective against a nuclear explosion and could be used on a large scale. The most effective reply to a threat of attack would be a counter-threat with a similar weapon. Given these conditions, could any government that could afford nuclear weapons afford not to have them? Only 3 years after Hahn and Strassmann proved nuclear fission, as the world goes up in flames by conventional means, programs to actively explore its potential as weapon are underway at varying levels of advancement in Germany, Great Britain, France, the United States, the Soviet Union, Canada, and Japan. The British and German projects generally proceed with optimism, and the American project accelerates based on fear that Germany, now rampaging across Europe, is well on the way to developing its own prototype. In the Soviet Union, though, experts remain unconvinced by the prospect. When, back on September 1st, 1939, Niels Bohr and John Wheeler published a paper on the feasibility of nuclear fission using uranium-235, physicists around the world saw it as further proof of the amazing power of the atom. But the Soviets took it with a hefty pinch of salt, continuing to believe that technology does not yet permit an efficient enough process to be useful, and that initiating the fission process will ultimately cost more energy than it yields, making the entire idea superfluous. As we know now, it is, of course, the combined British-American-Canadian project, the Manhattan Project, which bears fruit. The Trinity test, the first detonation of a nuclear weapon, goes ahead successfully on July 16, 1945, and 2 bombs are dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on the 6th and 9th of August, respectively. The former bomb based on uranium-235 and the latter a plutonium-based reaction. Okay, I'm skipping over a lot of details on the Manhattan Project and Trinity here, but we cover all of this, including the development, usage, and after effects, in much greater detail on our World War II channel. Check it out there. Links are in the pinned comment. Now, with the atomic demonstrations that ended World War II, all ambiguity about the power and terror of these weapons is gone. The fallout, both literal and figurative, is still not yet understood. What is understood is that nuclear weapons will be the currency of power in this new world. Without an arsenal of your own, you are always vulnerable, but with one, you are nigh untouchable. This means that the political dynamics between nations rapidly shifts as the USA emerges from the war as the only country with the expertise and facilities to immediately produce more. For them, it has become a game of limiting the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and every other nation which gets them has the potential to weaken the American hand. For every other country, it's a rush to get a hold of the bomb before the window closes. This window would, and eventually will, close with an international agreement on nuclear non-proliferation. After such a time, pursuit of a nuclear weapons program would make a nation an international pariah and draw the attention of the rest of the world. The fact that no such agreement currently exists in the post-war era means that the time is now, and the race is on. Some countries are said to have an easier time with this than others, in particular Britain and the Soviet Union. The USSR has been able to benefit massively from the wartime programs in the USA and Germany. The Allies do not realize it yet, but the Manhattan Project has been infiltrated by the Soviet NKVD, and countless nuclear secrets passed back to Moscow by physicist Klaus Fuchs. Many German scientists and much equipment has been shipped to the USSR from occupied Germany too. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics, next door to the Institute for Chemistry where Hahn and Strassmann worked, has been dismantled and transported east. Other German scientists, such as Nikolaus Riel, whose expertise in purifying uranium would prove crucial to the Soviet project, have gone east to work for the Soviets either voluntarily or under duress. Espionage and foreign expertise provides them a solid basis with which to refine their own thinking and will help them to overcome key obstacles of technical know-how. However, it is important to understand these benefits as bonuses rather than enablers. It shaves off years of development time, but their absence would only delay the Soviet grasp for nuclear energy, not prevent it. In Washington, the Americans begin to grapple with the question of how to control the spread of this new and dangerous information. The Washington Declaration of November 15, 1945, would seem to provide a basis for how future atomic cooperation is to go ahead. A joint statement by the US, UK, and Canada, the declaration reflects the opinion that this is too significant a moment in human history to restrict it entirely to the benefit of a handful of nations. The declaration recognizes the potential benefits, but also the dangers of this new technology, and stresses the need to promote humanitarian and domestic use of atomic energy while discouraging developments of weapons of mass destruction. Britain and Canada, who have contributed greatly to the American project, naturally assume that the information osmosis between the three nations will continue post-war, and they receive some verbal assurances from U.S. officials on the matter at their conference in Washington. A non-binding agreement is finally signed on the final day of the conference by British Prime Minister Clement Attlee and by U.S. President Harry Truman. A formal agreement would have to be submitted to the United States Senate with unpredictable results. It was hoped instead that the President and Prime Minister would sign the less formal instrument, which would determine a working relationship. However, there was not time to do even this before the conference ended, and an even briefer document was prepared for Mr. Truman and Mr. Attlee. This was a very flimsy piece of paper, signed in a great hurry on the last morning of the conference, and later it was to become apparent that Truman did not realize the full implications of what he was signing. And so, both Britain and Canada walk away from the conference assured that the US neither intends nor desires a nuclear monopoly. The reality is that while Truman might be willing to share, Congress is perhaps not. The question of information control has been bouncing around the halls of Congress ever since Trinity, and as the political relationships between East and West have gradually degraded, the general mood has been shifting more in favor of strict control of nuclear research. This suspicion only intensifies after Igor Gozenko, a Soviet cipher clerk, defects and provides documentation of widespread infiltration by Soviet spies across the West. One of the names on this list is Dr. Alan Nunn May, a British physicist who has been passing the Soviets information on the British and American nuclear programs, as well as samples of enriched uranium for testing. The result of this is the McMahon Act, formerly the United States Atomic Energy Act of 1946, submitted by Democratic Senator Brian McMahon. The bill, as originally proposed, is focused more on domestic restriction of information to civilian sources, but gradually evolves and is shaped by growing worries about Soviet infiltration. By the end of the bill's journey through Congress, it includes military oversight and provisions to restrict the flow of information to foreign nations. In effect, this shuts down all pre-existing collaboration and violates verbal agreements between the US and its allies. This was never the intention of McMahon, nor his bill, and the question of U.S. obligations to allied nations comes up several times during the debate process. But senators and representatives simply don't know about any existing accords, as they were agreed and signed with a great deal of secrecy during the war, and remain nominally classified. McMahon will later tell the British Labour government's Minister of Defence, Albert Alexander, that had the full picture been given to Congress by the President and the State Department, his bill would have likely never passed in the form that it did. Be that as it may, the British must now forge ahead on their own. They're not quite back to square one, though. They still have a solid base of expertise and research available to them, but the facilities and testing sites in America that had been central to much of their work are now off limits. Nevertheless, the pursuit of atomic weaponry is not up for debate in London. More or less every minister and shadow minister of every party tacitly or actively agrees with the policy of nuclear armament for Britain. Regardless of the enduring close relationships between London and Washington, there is no guarantee that America would back up British interests with nuclear power, and it would be dependent on the whims of the sitting US president at such time. Although Britain very much sees the future of European security being contingent on US and European cooperation, this level of dependence on an ally is unthinkable. The early phases of the program get underway almost immediately, with Attlee himself supervising the proceedings closely, with most of the details kept secret from the wider cabinet. So in January 1947, after a great deal of background development, the British government will formally take the decision to build a plutonium bomb. Meanwhile, in the US, the interest has turned towards delivery methods. Soon after the bombs are dropped over Japan, the idea of using rockets or missiles to deliver atom bombs is floated in several places. This ignites the drive to protect America against an enemy with such capabilities, which leads to the test to detect missiles with radar in Project Diana that we saw in our episode about the beginning of the space age. In the autumn of 1945, Nazi German rocket pioneer Wernher von Braun pens a letter to the lead creator of the atom bomb, Robert Oppenheimer, suggesting to use a boosted version of his A4, also known as V2, rocket to deliver a 2-metric ton atomic bomb payload thousands of kilometers. By summer of 1946, this letter has been turned into a U.S. Army memo tracing a path towards intercontinental ballistic missiles armed with nuclear warheads. Around the same time, Soviet scientists also began to theorize a combination between fission and rocketry. However, the disinterest by the Soviet War Department in missile technology slows down the beginning of practical research. Nevertheless, the development of the Soviet R-3 missile will begin in 1947 under leadership of engineer Sergei Korolev, charged with missile research by the Kremlin. Originally believing atom bombs will continue to be very heavy, they envision a multi-stage missile capable of hitting targets anywhere on Earth with such a massive payload. But by 1947, the Soviet nuclear program is already on track to deliver warheads slightly less heavy than originally anticipated, well below 3 metric tons. So the R-3 project will be a more modest idea for a single-stage missile capable to strike at a distance of 3,000 kilometers. For Korolev, now unfettered from the shackles put on him by the Red Army doubters, the R-3 is a way to deepen Soviet understanding of rocketry and gain technical expertise towards the true goal, an intercontinental ballistic missile along the same lines as the one Wernher von Braun envisions. Against the backdrop of all these developments, the US proceeds to active testing of atom bombs to determine how they can be used. Which brings us to July 1946 and the Bikini Atoll, 1 month before the signing of the McMahon Act. The tests are, as we saw earlier, aimed to gauge the effect on a fleet of ships, but also as a further demonstration of atomic power to the world and to further develop the doctrine of atomic warfare. The future of conventional military forces is by now under scrutiny. How necessary is a strong navy and army in the age of atoms? Can these weapons be used tactically against opposing fleets and armies? Well, not in their current states, so say the report of 2 Soviet observers. Meshcheryakov and Alexandrov were not impressed by the first explosion, in which a plutonium bomb was detonated over a group of warships. They wrote of the general disappointment with the results of the explosion. The ships had survived extremely well, and the material results of the explosion proved to be insignificant compared with what had been expected here. If the United States' purpose in staging the test had been to impress the Soviet Union with the power of the bomb, it had failed to do so. While the view of the Soviet observers might be slightly more negative than warranted, the tests have not been a roaring success. The first bomb detonated above the fleet missed the mark by some 600 meters, and the second bomb exploded underwater was also plagued by serious miscalculations undermining the effectiveness of the test. In one way, the tests are a terrible success. Thousands of animals put on the ships as guinea pigs die from radiation poisoning, and the contamination of the lagoon and the atoll will further the understanding of the dangers of nuclear arms. But that will take years, even decades, to fully become public knowledge and lead to outrage that may temper the impulse to use these weapons. In the meantime, although unimpressed, the Soviets take the tests as a sign of American unwillingness to commit to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, further entrenching them in their own pursuit of the bomb. We have entered into the age of the nuclear arms race, and the growing dichotomy between a liberal West and a communist East will soon be underpinned with the power to end the argument and all future arguments with the press of a button. This is the atomic age. This is our species. Those notions of liberalism and communism, which have split the world, are not standing still either, and the defeat of fascism has in some ways provoked more questions than have been answered. In our next episode, Anna and Sebastian will be looking into these questions and how contemporary thinkers in 1946, such as Karl Popper and Hannah Arendt, are grappling with the lessons we must learn from the cataclysms originating from the regimes that launched the Second World War. To be part of our mission to provide entertaining learning material based on our past failures and successes in order to enable us to build a better future, join the TimeGhost Army at timeghost.tv or on patreon.com. Everything we do is made possible by the TimeGhost Army, and together we aim to go even further and higher. Excelsior!